Hey, hi! Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, I'm a programmer at TIFF now, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Zarrar Kahn, a writer and director whose short films have been connecting with audiences around the world for more than a decade. He makes his feature debut with In Flames, which stars Ramesha Nawal as a medical student in Karachi struggling to keep her family intact while being stalked by forces she can't fully understand. It premiered at Cannes last year before making its North American debut at TIFF, and it opens across North America this Friday, April 12th. It's really quite powerful, and you should check it out. Zarrar picked BeDevil, the first and only feature film from Australian artist Tracey Moffatt. Made in 1993, it's a collection of ghost stories that elaborate on the disconnection between Australia's indigenous culture and the white settlers who did their best to erase it, told with an uncanny, stylized staging that immerses us in Moffatt's vision even before we understand what it is we're watching. It has genre elements, obviously, but it's not a horror movie, not really, and the more we talked about it, the more it made sense that Zarrar would in fact be haunted by it, so to speak. This is Someone Else's Movie.
I saw BeDevil with a friend because they're developing a film that also has devil in the title. So they're now watching any movie that has devil, like literally in the title. And I was like, okay, like it was at the Lightbox, just on like, I think like a Tuesday. And I'm like, all right, let's go. And like, I had absolutely no idea what I was getting into, which is kind of my favorite way of watching movies, like really knowing very little. And then, I was just, I was blown away, like it's kind of three ghost stories. It's by Australian Indigenous artist filmmaker, and this is their debut film. Her name is Tracey Moffatt. And I thought I was going to be seeing like a clear genre movie because the film was titled BeDevil. I know my friend's movie is also very genre heavy. So I'm like, okay, we're going to be watching like a slasher film. This was not that.
No.
Not at all. Like it was, so it's essentially three ghost stories that are like stories that I did some digging right before this interview that are stories that the artist said like kind of grew up in Australian culture. And they're all really different takes. Like two of them are shot entirely on a soundstage.
Mm-hmm.
One is like a documentary cooking show where it's really like docu style. Like I don't think I've seen a braver first feature than this, where she's offering three very different things that are all tied thematically, but being like deeply bold and inventive in the execution. Yeah, two of them are on a soundstage, like so beautiful. And it's also intermingling like culture and like capitalism and race and class. And it's just so weird and incredible. And it makes me think of filmmakers who are able to achieve this on like I don't know why, but I saw this film and then I thought of Quirrell, which was also largely shot in the soundstage, which was that director's, whose name currently escapes me. What's his name? The German guy?
Fassbinder?
Fassbinder. It's Fassbinder's like ninth movie, where he like was like, okay, fuck it. I'm just going to make the film that I want to make. That's weird. And this is Tracy's first film. Like yeah, have you seen it?
I have, yeah. I actually just rewatched it last night, but I hadn't seen it since '93, since TIFF, I think, since the festival. Yeah. And I remembered almost none of it, which was really rare for me. I'm pretty good at key images or exchanges. I have a good memory for this stuff, but I did not remember the soundstage aspects at all, which is so weird because that would have stood out to me then. And I read back through my notes and stuff, and I never reviewed it. So I mentioned it. It was screened I think Imaginative screened it in 2015 or 2016 before this restoration, which was the version that played at TIFF and the version that's available online now in a couple of places. And
I feel like TIFF should be sponsoring this cast, by the way.
I mean, I've suggested it a couple of times, but I like my independence. It's so stylized and so arch, and I remember it being, this sounds weird, I remember it being more disturbing than it is, because it's really not a horror film. I mean,
not at all.
Ghost stories, absolutely, but presented through the lens of folklore and engagement, right? Like nobody's, the first story, Mr. Chuck, there are characters who are afraid of the ghost because it's known for grabbing people. But they're also really intrigued by it and curious about it and engaging with the story. And the adult version of one of his, I guess victims is the wrong word because he obviously wasn't killed by this ghost, but one of the people that the spirit encounters, the adult version is enthusiastic about the story. And you get the sense that he's happy to share it and talk about it. And he's not, it's none of the cliches of, oh, don't go down there and don't go in the swamp, Mr. Chuck will get you. None of that is there. And then in the second and third stories, the hauntings are, they're almost not interested in humans at all, in the living. They're just around, which is such a weird, like compelling way into this story. And it put me in mind of Peter Weir's The Last Wave, which is not an Indigenous filmmaker. It's definitely an outsider story, but it's about a white journalist finding his way into a much, much larger, almost an apocalyptic prediction in a culture he doesn't understand. And so he misinterprets almost everything. And here, it felt the opposite. It felt like the movie fully understands everything that it's doing, and it's up to us to divine the meaning because we're not from there. I mean, even if you're from an Indigenous culture, if you're not from an Aboriginal Indigenous culture from Australia, then you won't have the same connections. And that strangeness permeates the whole story, and it just makes you wonder, why is this person laughing? What's going on in that corner? Why am I on a soundstage? And the artifice of it, it just puts it, to me anyway, it framed it as a tale that is being told to me, which I think is what folklore is, right? But she found a cinematic analog that I don't think anyone had ever really attempted. And this is, a year after Strictly Ballroom. That's the other thing I keep coming back to. Like Baz Luhrmann had just made this proudly artificial film, this celebration of construction, which had been an international hit. This is just another Australian filmmaker saying, I can use pieces of that, but I really don't want to copy it. And she found this other language in what he was doing, which I'm sure she was already working on. But there's this sense like something was bubbling up in Australia at that moment, and we got to be part of it.
And that's where, for me, it's also like wondering the Australian Film Commission, like, how did they greenlight this movie? Like, I imagine for Tracey as an artist, she must have been quite successful, like as an independent artist not working in film.
I think so.
In order for this deeply wild pitch to resonate and for them to put this film forward. But for me, the way that the stories were told, like, I found a lot of overlap in like ghost stories in Pakistani culture, where like, we grow up talking about like stories of jinns, which are like seen to be a religious figure and they're in the Quran. And, those are stories that are told to us like in between religious studies class. And they're told not as like a don't go there. They're told as like this is part of our culture and our heritage. And, these are very real things that walk with us, and it's just normal, So for me, when I was watching BeDevil, it was that aspect of it where they weren't being told as ghost stories, but told as like this supernatural element that is real and alive and from this land and lives with you, where I was watching it and viewing it through that lens, where I'm like, growing up in Pakistan, we also grow up learning about supernatural figures as just part of life. So not seeing it as this, horror, like big moments, but more just like this kind of, it felt like very neighborhoody to me in the way that these stories were being told, like you got a feeling of a community. It's a community that is very disparate and very, everyone kind of knows their spot. Which was really clear from Tracey's intention of how she told the Mr. Chuck story, where she started out with the daughter of the, the white female daughter who was the landowner, and that being the first person who's telling that story. And then we kind of start to learn really what happened to the indigenous people from that land. So it was just so deeply fucking smart, I loved it. Yeah. And then I'm like, where's her next movie? And I don't know if there was one.
I couldn't find one. I'm going to triple check right now that I'm thinking about it. I know she participated in, shorts. She made shorts, and she made a music video for INXS for the song The Messenger. But she made two shorts called Heaven and Artist in 97 and 99, and then nothing in features or shorts in although I understand the art is still going. And she's only in her, yeah, she'd be 64 this year. So it's not like she stopped, I don't think. She just didn't do anything that broke outside of
I
Australia.
wonder if it was one of those things where she made that movie and then decided that the practice of making feature films is not where she feels most fulfilled. You know, it could be that like she's a successful artist outside. It could also be that thing where it's very difficult for women of color filmmakers to make another movie after their debut, depending on the performance. But I do think this one was like at Cannes and at TIFF.
It was,
So
yeah.
So I imagine the Australian Film Commission would be really happy with her. So, um, yeah, which is why I don't know. Maybe I'm leaning into it, but maybe she just didn't want to make another movie. You know?
Certainly, I mean, if she mostly works in photography, the time a film would take must be. I always wonder how people move from one specific form to another. It just feels like a huge leap. And when it works, it's fantastic and thrilling. And, you know, like somebody like Tony Kaye can make the kind of movie he wants to make and still be, you know, publicly very difficult about that. But he approached it all with the sense of, you know, if it doesn't work out, I can always go back to my other career. And then there's someone like Steve McQueen who just goes all in on the texture and the cinematic potential of a moving image and uses time and uses, you know, like he calls it the patient camera, but his thing of simply observing a moment, it's a photographer's instinct, but what he brings to it with drama is really fascinating. And yeah, Moffatt just, she was at the Venice Biennale. I always mispronounce that. In 2017,
Yeah.
representing Australia. She got an honorary fellowship at the Royal Photographic Society in 2020, and is just still around. Apparently, lives in goes back and forth from Sydney and New York, and is apparently quite successful. But yeah, I wish she'd made another film just so I could see what she would have evolved into and what she would have done differently.
Yeah. And I mean, she also started off the bat not making like a small film. You know, like this was a huge cast, essentially a whole new film every 40 minutes.
Yeah. Oh,
So
not even. I mean, the whole thing is like 87. The first Mr.
Oh,
Chuck's only
wow.
25 minutes. I was shocked to
Okay.
realize how short it was.
Yeah, I thought it was like, I thought the runtime was like an hour 30, an hour 40, but I guess it's less than that. So yeah, I mean, she essentially made three very like felt like episodes, but each one was its own entire world. So I can't imagine going from like a photographer practice, which is considerably less people heavy,
Mm.
to transitioning into something like this and how invigorating, but also likely draining it would have felt, you know, like because I write and I direct, the switch from like writing in isolation to then directing is a big, you know, it's like, okay, now I'm going into the part of my life where I'm going to be talking to people and meeting people constantly, you know, and I imagine photography as a practice is probably quite similar to writing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you have final say over literally everything, right? If you're the photographer, unless your subject takes exception, it's yours. You did it with a camera. There, you know, like it's a single instrument. It's a single piece of art. This thing has a helicopter shot in it. I mean, it's insanely complicated by comparison.
And even the bills that they did on those studio lots, like, you know, she built a farm and aliens, and then she also built a movie theater, and, you know, the slatting on the floors and the lake and the water, like it was a huge set, you
Mm-hmm.
know. I can't imagine how big it was or how they probably shot it. I would say they probably did all the outdoor stuff first. If I was like putting my first AD hat on,
Yeah.
probably shot all of that, and then they just moved into the studio for the rest of the shoot. But yeah, I mean, I also love that outdoor bit and like how it's entirely, you know, like a little cooking show. I don't know how else to describe it. Like it's a ghost story baked into, you know, this is how we make indigenous food, and then we're all gonna sit around and eat it. And you know, here's the lobster, and here's the crab, and here's the stuff we're foraging. And I'm like, this is exactly what I love. You know, like
Well, it's
yeah,
just
it
life
was
practices, right? I mean, it's simply it's almost well, it's not a procedural, but it's ethnography.
yeah.
Even though she's recreating so much of it for the purposes of fiction, and then also in a completely manufactured landscape. but it's true. Like, it feels true. It feels true to the details.
Yeah. And I mean, for that bit, at least they were out in the bush. That wasn't the like they'd moved out of the studio. And I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, that came third. So it was like we were finally outside of um the kind of soundstage, and it felt like, okay, this real world does exist after we really deeply engaged with this artificial world. Um and I mean, you could see her background as a photographer because some of the visuals were like deeply entrancing. Like what she did with shadow and light, and like it felt Hitchcockian in some ways with like the
Mm.
tension. And I just recently I rewatched a Hitchcock film. I think it was Dial M for Murder, which was like super fake, like really the whole thing is happening in a studio.
Yeah.
But again, he's playing with shadow and light and camera angles. And I wonder if that was one of her inspirations, because to me it kind of felt like it was.
The use of apparitions does feel very. I mean, I thought of Vertigo. I thought of the dissolves and
Yeah.
the optical placements, but Vertigo is also so lush and seething with meaning, with like personal psychosexual stuff, and this doesn't have that. This is more of a sense. It's similar in that it's a sense of something buried that won't stay buried, that something is forcing its way to the surface of these characters' lives. But it also just has the weird contrasts of the assumption of civilization, right? Like the white characters are all very manicured, except for one rough guy who turns out to be quite strangely sympathetic and caring, despite the fact that he's covered in tattoos and looks mean at kids. He just shoots them mean glances. I'm focusing on Mr. Chuck a lot, and I'm not really sure why. I guess it's because most of it happens in a single location in the studio stuff. But the woman who is his wife is our narrator, and
Yeah.
she's got a different perspective on him, the same way that the movie gives us a different perspective. Like, we're always in Moffat's point of view, where she's not. Well, yeah, I was going to say she's not suspicious of the white characters. She's mistrustful of them because they're the ones
Yeah.
throughout who are constantly trying to control the narrative and tell the story their way. As you said, like, she's the first voice, or the first voice we hear, the first person who tells a story is the white lady whose story it is not.
Which is where, like, again, it's something that deeply resonates with me because it's so smart, it's so satirical, where those characters who are the colonizers, the people who've taken over that land, feel like they're in charge, but our empathy is squarely with the indigenous characters.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same in the cooking bit, where it's being narrated by this older white woman who's like, I'm going to show you my land, and she brings along all of her indigenous help, who are the ones who are actually preparing the meal, who actually know the land. And we're watching, and the camera is following them as the narration is from the mistrustful white colonizer, who really has no idea how to prepare any of this food because she's not making any of it. So, like, it's such a deeply smart way to comment on Australia, on what contemporary Australia is, on what it means to be a settler colony, on who gets to talk and how they talk about land and how they talk about mythic spaces and how they talk about supernatural. Because for me, my empathy throughout this film, and I think cinema really is a empathy machine, was not with the mistrustful narrator, was not with the person who got the most screen time and was perfectly lit. It was with the people who felt like they were truly from the space. And they were also engaging with the land in a different way. One was very removed, and one was in their home, or, for example, with the outdoor cooking space, like the weird set that they built, in the outdoor, versus the other were like foraging. They were like swimming in the water, like it was a different relationship to land. Yeah, Tracy was a fucking genius. It was funny. It was campy. It was, yeah, it's everything I aspire to do as a filmmaker. So, it was really fucking great. Yeah.
Hey, it's Norm, interrupting my own show to bring you up to speed on Shiny Things, my newsletter about physical media, culture, and the odd streaming project. Last week, I spent almost 3,000 words on James Cameron's very personal and very closely overseen restorations of Aliens and the Abyss, which just arrived on 4K disc last month. Great movies, weird mastering. Sign up for a 14-day free trial at shiny-things.ghost.io or find a link at the Semcast Blue Sky account. You like reading about movies? I like writing about them. Come check it out. Well, what was the audience response when you saw it? I mean, was it a full screening? How populated was the room?
I'm gonna say we were what cinema were we in? It wasn't the tiny cinema. I think it was Cinema 3. So it was the larger one, and I'm gonna say like around 80 people, 80, 85. Yeah, and I mean, I wonder how many of those it was also, I think it might have been like during Indigenous Screening Week. So, they were also screening a couple films from a Canadian Indigenous filmmakers as well. The one that's starring Devery that I really enjoyed, not Blood Quantum, but the other one.
Rhymes for Young Ghouls. Yeah, Jeff's first film.
Which I finally got to see in a cinema, which is totally how it needs to be watched.
Absolutely.
And then it was weird contrasting those two films. I have to say I really enjoyed BeDevil a lot more. Uh, and I think it's because for me as an artist, like I also want to go more into like the absurd of genre and less into like the scares. So and like comment with satire, and that's what I felt like Bedevil did really well, and that's what I'm now trying to do with my sophomore film. Versus with Rhymes for Young Ghouls. I don't know, it felt like deeply North American. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I mean, Jeff Barnaby was in love with North American genre representations. He grew up on that stuff, and it always made its way into his work. I think Blood Quantum, he tries so hard not to do Romero that he ends up steering right back into it anyway. But you can feel like the literacy of the genre with him, but it's definitely a North American experience.
Yeah. And I think what I enjoyed more about Devil was it also felt like it was learning about a culture. And I don't know, I like learning about new places. You know what I mean? And with Rhymes for Young Ghouls, I felt like growing up, in Canada and also growing up watching genre filmmaking, I'm like, okay, this is an extension of worlds that I'm very familiar with.
Yeah.
And what I love about movies is, learning about a new place or something, or a way of seeing the world that you haven't seen it before.
Yeah, and BeDevil absolutely drops you in and doesn't give you a map. There's no way back out, right? You just have to sit there and watch the movie. And the thing that struck me this time was, I'm sure I hadn't noticed it because it just wouldn't have been a front of mind in 1993, at least for me, is the sense that every single one of the Indigenous characters is waiting for the white people to leave in every scene. And it's not part of the plot, like with Love and the Spin I'm in, with just this increasing parade of corporate idiots trying to get rid of these ghosts, that they're not bothering anybody, they're just making noise, which I guess it's bothering you if you want to put up condos. But just the sense that they're all white, they're all useless, each one more blustery than the last, and the Indigenous characters are just standing there going, well, they're going to do what they do. They haven't, it's not that they've tried everything to get rid of these particular ghosts. It's that they have lived with the ghosts in general long enough to know what the ghosts do, and that the ghosts don't care if you want to knock their building down. Reservation Dogs played with it all the time too. It became this running joke that white people see any Indigenous presence as, oh, these are people of the land, and then immediately ignores anything that they tell them, avoids contacting them when issues come up. And as you say, like, the people who have cared for this land all along are the ones you should probably defer to in how to deal with it. But this is that too. It's just an absolute refusal to engage with the culture and the people who were there before you. And what BeDevil gets that I hadn't noticed the first time around is that the Aboriginal characters have long since stopped waiting for the white people to talk to them. Like, they'll take their money, they'll work for them.
They're not imagining that there will be cross collaboration like that.
Exactly.
It'll be like talking to a wall, and then, they're not interested in our culture. They're here, and it's really, really prevalent in that cooking segment where they're really making food from the land, but there's no engagement of like, how do we actually prepare this? Like, here's a local dish, they're going to locally make it, we're going to eat it, and I'm going to show you how it is. And I think food is so interesting because it is, food is a people, food is a culture. And Tracy picked up on the different ways that culture presents itself and how that culture is being eroded. And like you're saying, how there's not collaboration and how do we engage with that space? Yeah, man. Now that I think about it more, I need to watch this film again. But I'm so happy I saw it the way I saw it, where I went in having no idea what this movie was about, uh, no idea literally anything, and I got to watch it in a movie theater, because it's so hard to watch films like these in cinemas, you
Yeah.
know?
Oh, yeah. I mean, and now that I work for TIFF, I'm aware of just how hard it is to get people to come out for a movie that they've never heard of. It happens, and it can happen, but now it's all hooked to, who's talking it up on social media or who else you like who knows about it, which
Yeah.
turns movies into an oral tradition, which I find absolutely fascinating.
It's just cycling back,
Yeah.
you know? Yeah. I mean, honestly, like as we're doing marketing and distribution for the film, I realized that that's not my cup of tea. I don't really know it, and I don't know how to get people to watch movies. But I think with BeDevil, the title was fucking genius. You know, it brings people in. It's like this is how much work a title can do. We went to watch the film because Devil was in the title.
That's amazing. Well, so how many
So
people are going to come see In Flames because Flames is in the title, and they're hoping for something with more of a conflagration than they'll actually get.
we'll find out. We're gonna find out soon. I think I've definitely benefited from playing with genre and from leaning into those tropes. One big way is how we were able to theatrically release in Pakistan, and
Mhm.
the film having genre elements allowed us to clear the censor board, because they were like, "Oh, it's just another ghost story. There's nothing in here,"
Oh,
and
that's amazing. I hadn't heard that's how
it's
it did it.
but it's what genre does. It allows you to speak to things like Bedevil does, um, uh, without fear of censorship. In some ways, you can be free when you're speaking through metaphor and through these pre-existing tropes. So yeah, already benefited from it.
That's great. And I have been really enjoying this new wave of it's not, elevated horror is already worn out as a catchphrase or as a catch-all, but it's a language of genre that's being used to draw people into straight dramatic stories. I mean, there are elements of In Flames that are paranormal, supernatural, fantastical, but ultimately it's really rooted in the day to day. It's about someone trying to live in the real world and almost ignore the spectacular to deal with the things that are directly in front of her and how that doesn't work. Which you could also just say is simply a metaphor for the grief she's experiencing or the oppression and the patriarchy has forced on her since day one. And I mean, we talked about this at the festival. The thing that I find so compelling is the way that it connects to people who have no experience, just like BeDevil, right? I mean, you're dropped into this world, and whether or not you recognize it, you recognize the people inside of it and follow them.
And going back to Bedevil, I'm wondering, did they have a trailer? How did they market this movie?
It's
Because
a
like
good
now that we're
question.
doing marketing for In Flames, it's really hard because we're not a pure genre offering. We're also not drama. So it's like finding that line of how to bring in people who would be interested and exciting about the movie. And I'm like, maybe our trailer says nothing. Maybe we have a black screen, like because it's tough. And I wonder with The Devil, how did they market the film? Was it marketed? Like was it one of those very 90s trailers with like a VO, enter a world, or like how did
Right.
they do it?
Oh, there must be something out there. I mean, it was produced by, like a federally funded organization. They would have cut something, and it went to Cannes, right? I mean, you were actually at Cannes with In Flames 30 years after BeDevil.
We didn't
But
have a trailer.
that's
Uh,
true. Oh, but you had
or
telefilm telling people about it at least.
we had Telefilm talking about it, but we didn't have a trailer until like 2 weeks ago. So like yeah, like now that we're theatrically distributing a film in North America, we have a trailer. But prior to that, we really just had a scene excerpt because we could not figure out for the life of us what is the language we use to get people to come watch this film. And we decided in confusion. So I wonder with Bedevil, because it was the Australian Film Board, and also because Baz Luhrmann's film was out at the same time, maybe they put all their eggs in a different basket, you
Mm.
know?
I don't know. I would go with the whole you like movies that happen on a stage. This is on a stage, and just let
Yeah.
people figure it out.
I want a re-release with Nicole Kidman as the executive producer. Or we have Taika now. Maybe, I mean,
Taika
he's not
maybe.
Australian, he's New Zealand, but you know. Are you watching contemporary Australian films?
I am, yeah, not as many as I used to, since the focus has pivoted, but I'm catching what I can.
Do you feel like there's a legacy of films like BeDevil? Like, has there been an impact from BeDevil and contemporary Australian cinema?
It's funny, not in the same way that you would expect a horror film to resonate. I think it's just because it's too weird and too
Yeah.
not genre, or like it is genre, but it's too not horror to be something that catches on. But I see things like, oh, what was the last one? I mean, there's definitely a sense. I guess the weird thing I'm thinking of, the film I'm thinking of is Wolf Creek, where there is an indigenous character who's basically just there to serve as a warning because that's an exploitation movie,
Hmm.
and it's about
Similar situation. I just saw Talk to Me, which
oh yeah,
is it does it in the same way where it's just a warning. And it literally, as you were saying, like they just don't listen to the indigenous people when they're like, this is a bad idea, and then shit happens.
yeah,
You know?
yeah. I mean, the genius
Yeah.
of Talk to Me is that it's teenagers, so you just assume they're going to do the dumbest thing possible.
And then they do.
Yep,
Uh,
that's the beauty of cinema.
I wasn't realizing it was a metaphor for drugs. And then when it ended where it did, I'm like, wow, this movie's comedic. But it had some of the most visceral scares I've seen in a while.
Yeah, it's really good. It's funny. Some part of my brain doesn't classify that as Australian for some reason. I don't know why. It just
I
feels
guess
like
that the
it's
marketing was so American.
maybe, yeah. And
Yeah.
it feels so, well, there's a slickness to it, right? Like and
Yeah.
that's deeply unfair to Australian cinema, but there's a level of production gloss within the concept of the kids shooting their own smartphone footage and all that that doesn't feel Australian. But of course, Australian commercial cinema has been chugging along for decades.
Booming. Yeah.
We just released an episode about Lake Mungo, a film from 2007, a found footage Australian
Hmm.
movie that is pretty much all white people, all white characters. It's about a family that loses a daughter to a drowning,
Hmm.
but then is convinced that she's still haunting them. And
Hmm.
they're right, but not in the way they think they are. And it's got this great eeriness. That's probably the film, the most recent production, and this is almost 20 years ago now, that ties to the Peter Weir thing, The Last Wave, the vibe that something's in the land that you don't understand. Picnic at Hanging Rock
Hmm.
did the same thing as well,
Hmm.
where whatever it is, it's older than we can possibly understand or perceive.
Hmm.
And the idea, I mean, that's where cosmic horror gets us now, right? Like the things that happen on geological time that are just
Hmm.
waiting for us to show up so we can get squished.
Hmm.
That's not what BeDevil is either, right? Like,
I mean, for me, Bedevil is like we know the land, the real horror, and is coming from those who refuse to know the land, and those who are here to conquer the land without engaging with it. That to me is the note that the film ends on, while it leads us on this journey.
yeah. And it still comes out with a laugh. It ends on a funny.
Yeah. Yeah, which is why I love it, which is why I want to, that's where that my next project is deeply seeing Bedevil as what the potential of genre cinema can be,
Oh,
you know?
that sounds fascinating.
But yeah, there's another film. I mean, off this note of cosmic horror, like land-based horror
Mhm.
almost. Yeah, it's usually man versus the land when we talk about that. You know, it's like Cabin in the Woods or like, you know, like we don't know what's out there. And I get that. Like I went cottaging for the first time ever. I haven't done that before, like a couple weeks ago. And I'm like, oh, I could be murdered in these woods, you know? And I'm like, is that just from growing up being a city kid, maybe? You know, like I've never really been in nature. Um, but why do people own cottages if they hate the land? Well, I guess a cottage is refuge from the land.
Yeah, I mean, you're building a fort, really. It's just a very small one.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't really understand cottage
Yeah,
culture.
it's never been my thing either. I always a family friend had one, and we would go up. And when I was like 6 or 7, we'd go up for weekends, and I was bored out of my mind. I never felt
Yeah.
threatened, but neither was I the sort of kid who ran off to explore. It was just
Yeah.
dull. But it was the 70s, so there was nothing to do.
Well, I guess to do would just be go for a walk, you know, or like go in the pool or the lake. I grew up, my grandparents had a place in the mountains in Karach in Natia Gully, which is like a hill station in the it gets very deeply green in the mountains. And, we would go there and spend the summers there, and it was amazing. And, but then again, like uh there's always that feeling that like, oh, something could go wrong. And I wonder if that's just like human nature, you know? When you're not from a place, you want to civilize it, I guess.
Oh, you want to
I don't know.
control it, certainly.
I don't know where the impulse comes from, you know?
Yeah.
I'm very happy being deep in Toronto. Like, I have a streetcar out my window, and every time I hear it, I'm like, I'm at home, Because I grew up in Karachi, which is like 30 million people. So the noise of the city is something that I can deeply unwind to.
Yeah. Well, that's probably why there are so many cottage-based horror movies. Even something
Yeah.
like Violation a few years ago, where the serenity of nature is just there to watch all this horrible stuff happen between human beings.
Yeah. There was this one that came out about a family. It was like a Dutch family where they go on a road trip and called Don't Ask Now or Don't something like that. I just remember the poster being like really terrifying.
Speak No Evil, was that it?
Yes. Speak No Evil.
Yeah.
Was it good?
Yeah. They're doing a remake, which makes no sense.
Didn't it come out like 2 years ago?
It did. I think it's the same director, but I just don't see the point of remaking that story, because if you know it, it's like Funny Games, right? If you know it, there's no surprise to see another version of it. And if you don't know it, it's such a hard, weird sell. People looking for it will find out about the original, and then they'll see that.
It makes me think of like that Quebecois film Starbuck, which was remade with like Will Ferrell. And I was like, this is the weirdest film to ever remake.
Oh, Vince Vaughn.
Yeah. And I was like, why did they remake it? The original was great. It's also like, I never understood why they would remake such a specific movie.
Yeah. And lose all the Quebecois nature of it. Like the jokes
Which
don't
was
translate.
what made it great,
Yeah.
It was so Quebecois.
People never learn. I guess this is also the lesson of BeDevil.
Yeah, people never learn. That's definitely the lesson of BeDevil. We got to get Tracey Moffatt out and get her to make another movie. Now if I ever end up in Australia, I know who to track down. Although you said she's in London now?
New York and Sydney.
Okay. Well, we're going to New York, so we'll see if we can invite her for a screening.
Oh, she'll get it. Yeah, she'd definitely get it.
That would be cool. We have, a couple Australians that we can reach out to see if they can connect. I do find the artist filmmaker community to be its own thing. I don't know if you've experienced that, but there's like filmmakers and then artist filmmakers, and they generally don't vibe with each other. But I don't know. You've met so many filmmakers. I'm sure you can speak to that more.
I have experienced it here and there. I don't know. I think they just don't respect the discipline, or they do respect their discipline so much that they don't want people coming in as dilettantes.
Yeah, I think that's a really good, or like, it's like, oh, you're a real art? No, you're a real art. Like that would be the broken down version of what you just said.
Yeah, but you phrased it more convincingly.
Yeah. My friends always say I have a really great way of like speaking so it's more accessible, which is what I also try and do with my films. I think films are the most accessible art. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
And that's probably why I hope it's here to stay, but we'll see.
My thanks to Zarrar Kahn, whose first feature, In Flames, opens across North America this Friday, April 12th. See it in the biggest room you can find. Thanks also to Marguerite Barbara. She knows what she did. You can find Zarrar on Instagram at kahn.zarrar, KAHN.ZARRAR, and you can find BeDevil streaming on ovid.tv. It's also available on demand at vimeo.com/ondemand/BeDevil. I'm just hoping Criterion gives it a special edition someday. You can find me on Blue Sky at Norm Wilner, and you can find this podcast there at Semcast, SEMcast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. The first year of the show is still available for just $20 at payhip.com/semcast. That's the first 52 episodes of Someone Else's Movie, 44 of which aren't currently available anywhere else. And check out my newsletter, Shiny Things, at shiny-things.ghost.io. I think you'll enjoy it. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it, or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review wherever you've been listening. Every little bit helps. It truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're doing that. Stay safe, watch movies, wear a mask if you go out, get the new booster when you can. I'll see you next week.